dad life. No, you can't get Chad life. What you know about that burger flipping dad life? Raising teens, birds and bees. It ain't a bad life, it's a dad life. Hot rods, hot dogs, working on my dad bod. Flexing on the beat in my burger flipping big dogs. Taking naps, CPAPs. It ain't a bad life, it's a dad life.
You know, I realized watching that first service just how much more I'm stepping into dad life every day, I feel like.
I didn't want to say anything, but I look like you up there.
Yeah.
Which one?
No. Don't answer that question. Do not answer that question. Oh,
My favorite was when he said, "Ship Lappin, call me Chip Gaines."
Yeah. All I know is that guy when he says, "You can call me Peepaw," and Meemaw.
Very aggressively.
Yeah. I just thought about how many times like we've tried to correct grandparents on like, hey, let's watch the sugar intake. Don't care, I raised
Don't
you,
care.
that was it. Now the
Yeah.
grandkids, whatever we want to do.
Keeping dentists in business, you know what I mean?
That's it. That's it. I'd try to send my dad the dentist bill, and it just wouldn't work. Not happening. Well, hey, happy Father's Day to all of you dads, men out there. Thanks for being here on like a rainy day. Father's Day, I mentioned last week, Father's Day is like the one time that you're like, okay, Dad, happy Father's Day. We're not going to go to church with you. And I'm like, how does that happen? Mother's Day, everybody shows up, wants to smile for the picture. Father's Day, it's like, nah, we're good. Dads, we got to do better, But hey, my name's Josh. My wife Brittany and I are the lead pastors here. This is Pastor Stephen. He's our student pastor. Pastor Brian, he's our pastor of connection and discipleship. And so we just thought it'd be fun to invite you into our backyard today. Somebody asked me if I was going to eat a brat during service. No, I pre-gamed. And so I had my brat pre-service, and I may sneak one on the way out because they're good. Got a little tender love and care on those things. But here's just what I know. Father's Day, Mother's Day, when these holidays come, it can be really awkward to come to church. And it's like, all the dads come to church and they're like on Mother's Day. And it's like, well, I'm just going to, tune out. And then all of a sudden you come to Father's Day and it's like, well, I'm not a dad, or, I don't have a great relationship with my dad, or I am a dad. Like all of these mixed things, we understand. We know that everybody's story is different. And so our kind of thought and our prayer today is that we would just look at fatherhood and see how we can look at some lessons from fatherhood on how it applies to our journey with Christ. And so if you're here today, this message is for you. And so it's not just, I think we were joking about it the other day, Mother's Day, it's like, hey, we love and appreciate you. And Dad's Day, it's like, hey, get your act together, men. That's
Here's some beef jerky.
That's not the message for today. And I will tell you, we had a great debate on what we were going to give dads today, or the men today, and we won. And that's why, gentlemen, there are brats and soda. And so happy Father's Day. So thank you. It's good. I feel like they should bottle, somebody said this, they should like make a candle for peppers and onions, If you smell like smoked pecan or bratwurst or peppers and onions, you're welcome. And so it's good. Well, here's what I know. All of us, we have some sort of experience with the Father. So for some of us in the room, that's positive. We talk about Father's Day and, man, just a wealth of warm memories. For others, that's been a very negative experience. For some, it's been an absent experience. But what I believe is through experience, we can learn a lot. And so good, bad, absent. And so today, we're just going to kind of like hop in, because I believe no matter what your story and your journey is, that today's message is for you. And so just to kind of get us warmed up a little bit, I thought it'd be fun for all of our dad's situations are completely different. And so I thought it would be good for us to kind of open up, share a little bit. So Stephen, tell us about your dads.
Yeah, so my name is Stephen Bailey, and as Pastor Josh mentioned earlier, I serve as the youth pastor here. My wife and I have only been here a few weeks, but you guys have made us feel right at home, so thank you for that. I'm not a dad just yet, but I got one on the way, my first one, so excited come November. Baby Bailey. And it's gonna be great. But yeah, so I come from a blended family, and if you're not familiar with that term, it pretty much means that your family unit was not necessarily your biological mother and father. So my parents divorced when I was 2 years old, so I have no memory of mom and dad ever being together in the same house. My dad remarried my stepmom. They've been married ever since. My mom had a few marriages, and she's currently married right now to my stepdad Scott, and they've been married I think for going on 25 years. So, but my dad, my biological father, his name is Gene. It's actually Eugene. People call him Gene, and he's a carpenter. So my whole life he was building houses, and I resonated with like flipping a half bath and a half day. Like that was my dad. Just great with his hands. And then my stepdad Scott, he spent 20 years in the Air Force, and so very disciplined guy and hard worker as well. And I've really learned a lot from both of them. Neither one of them were perfect. I've certainly had my ups and downs with both of them, but to this day, they both love me and I love them, and that's important, and we both learn from each other. So, but like Pastor Josh said, we all come from kind of different family backgrounds, and I know, Brian, you got a unique story as well.
Yeah, so, just as my name is Brian, and I'm the Discipleship Connections pastor here, and just like Stephen said, been here only a few weeks, but just feel at home already. So thank you so much for that. I've actually never met my biological father, and I was adopted and was orphaned before when I was born, was put in an orphanage, but my parents, they made the decision to adopt, and so I was blessed with the opportunity to come here, and they opened up their home to me, and I don't look like them, and that's okay. And I'll be honest, I didn't necessarily know I didn't look like them at first. I was in preschool, and a kid came up to me and just said, "Why do you look different?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" So I went home and I asked my dad, I said, "Dad, why do I look different than you?" And he had to gently explain to me that I was adopted, and but that's okay. It's been good, and I've only known them as my parents and my mom and dad, and so they didn't just open up their home to me, they opened up their heart, and that's just meant so much to me. And so, but about my dad, I mean, he would have been in this video. I mean, that is who my dad is. Wears the jorts, the white New Balance tennis shoes, wears the white socks up to the calf. Every Saturday morning, he mows the lawn. He taught me how to mow the lawn. I mean, to the point, some of you might understand this, that every week you mow the lawn differently, so that way the blades of grass are cut at different, I'm getting a thumbs up there, because you get optimal growth when your grass is exposed to different angles of sunlight. I mean, that is like true lawn mowing technique there. Our grass was the greenest grass and the most pristine lawn in the entire neighborhood. So, I mean, my dad would have been right up there in that video. So, it's good.
How does he keep his New Balances clean? Like I haven't.
He's got like a rotation. There's like 6 pairs.
Okay.
You know, like he's got to rotate them. Like, Dad, you get new shoes. Those are the same shoes. I think he bought like 10 pairs of the same shoes in case they go out of, like, they stop making them.
Because like the buy one, get 5 free, and he just
exactly.
take them all.
And he's going to rock them till the day he dies, because that's it.
That's
but
good.
I hear your dad. Like, I hear your dad's here. Like, literally, I can hear him throughout the service. I hear your dad. So why don't you tell us about him?
Yeah, you want an interesting dynamic to your father relationship. Try to wear hat of son and pastor. Sometimes we have to have a clarifying moment. Okay, is this a father-son chat, or am I your pastor in this moment, you know? On most days, no, I highly recommend it. It's great. It's wonderful. Here's the interesting thing, you know, for us. My parents have been married 40 some odd years, and they chose to adopt my sisters when I was 5, and so we've got that adds some dynamics to our family. But I think the greatest joy I'm experiencing in that relationship with my dad now is I'm getting to be a dad with my dad present. And so even though sometimes I have to take off the son hat and put on the pastor hat or vice versa, and I'm like, oh, wrong hat, shouldn't have said that. It can be tough to juggle sometimes, but it's incredible to get to share in those life experiences with my dad now. But here's one thing, and as we've been talking and preparing, a lot of us probably could list lessons, some good, some bad, that we've learned from our dads over the years, and so why don't we kind of get the conversation going, and maybe Pastor Stephen, if you'll dive in, what's a great lesson? What have you learned from your dads?
A lot. If I had to kind of pick just a couple moments that left an impact on me, I would say the first one was with Gene, the carpenter, my biological father. When I was a teenager, of course, I didn't live with my dad, but he had my two sisters living in his house, and both teenagers. And we had some extended family that were going through some difficult times, and there was a divorce, and it really was just a mess. And the kids were caught in the middle of it. And so my dad just opened up his home and said, hey, why don't you guys come live with us while your parents kind of sort the stuff out? And he never complained about it. He never, pulled me to his side and said, I really wish these kids, whatever. And if you've been around teenagers for more than 2 minutes, you know that they eat a lot, boys and girls. And so, he went from having 2 teenagers in the house to 4 girls. And like I said, never complained about it and took care of them. And now those 2 girls, now they're adults. They've got great lives. They're secure, and they've got great families of their own. And I don't know that would be true today if my dad didn't open up his home. And he's always just been incredibly kind and generous. You've heard the expression before, this guy's, he'd give you the shirt off of his back. I mean, that would really represent my dad really well. And so when I think about him, I just think of generosity and kindness, really humility. And then my stepdad, Scott, him being a military man, I got to see firsthand kind of what discipline and faithfulness just looks like in his life. But really, one thing that's always marked me about him is he was in the Air Force kind of at the peak of our wars in the Middle East. And so when I was a junior in high school, I was living with Scott, my stepdad, and my mom. He got PCS, which is military language for they transfer you from one base or post to another one. And so we were living in Georgia, and then he got PCS to Florida, which that particular part of Florida was about 7 hours away. And so he made the difficult decision to actually move by himself. And he drove home every other weekend just so I didn't have to change high schools. And at the time, I didn't think anything of it because I'm like, well, man, if I had a chance to move to Florida, I'd probably take it too, But as I got older, I realized, especially now that I'm married, man, what a sacrifice to live in a different state from your family and to make that drive every other weekend. I mean, he did it for 2 or 3 years, which is pretty incredible. And so when I think about him, I just think of how kind he is, how generous he is, and really sacrificial love so that we could keep the family together in Georgia and that I wouldn't have to experience transition. So those are just a couple things that stick out about him. I mean, obviously, if we had more time, I could share a lot more, but I know we've each got stories that we want to share.
Yeah. So for me, growing up, I think for a lot of us here, we've all had family challenges that we've had to navigate. And so my story's similar in that. My mom had struggled with some pretty severe mental health challenges over the years. And so growing up as a child and a teenager in our home, it was pretty tumultuous. It was pretty chaotic at times, and having to navigate that. And those are pretty formative years to have to navigate that type of situation. And I just remember that in those chaotic moments, I would want my dad to jump on my side. I would want my dad to emotionally respond because that's what I wanted, but it's not what I needed. And my dad, in those chaotic moments, he wasn't retaliated, he wasn't reacting, but he was embodying calm and what I can only describe as peace. And it was that peace that passes all understanding. a peace that was beyond any human comprehension. It didn't make sense to me. And it wasn't even what I wanted, but it's what I needed. And I don't know how I would have navigated those seasons of chaos growing up if my dad wasn't the anchor of peace for my family. And so I know for myself, my sister, and even for my mom, that was so important for us, and something that I can think of so many memories of my family. I can think of so many memories of my dad and the impact he's left, but I think some of the most influential moments that he has imparted in me is the moments when he embodied peace, even in the midst of a storm, and it's just been so influential in my life, and I wouldn't be here today if he didn't embody that. Yeah,
It's good. I think there's a lot of words that come to mind when I think about my dad. All good, by the way. Just sorry, Dad. But if there's something that I had to describe my dad with, it'd be faithful. And I think when we think about this idea of being faithful, faithfulness, it's often in our just willingness to continue to be obedient to God in the church context. But what I watched with my dad, and I'm still watching today, is my dad has been faithful to be a dad regardless of our decisions. And so although I really believe they did the best trying to raise the four of us, I have an older brother and then two sisters, and when we were in high school, we were 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. And so I didn't say my dad was smart. No, I'm just kidding. It's great. I mean, there's so many good things I could say about that and challenges. And I'm the youngest of those four, so I am slightly dysfunctional.
So you were the problem child?
Yeah. I mean, there are moments. But regardless of all of our decision making, my dad just stayed faithful. Like, he never gave up on us. He didn't change his parenting style to accommodate our life decisions. He just stayed true to who he was, and he still has stayed faithful to that today. There are moments where I look and I was making every decision with my life other than to follow Jesus and his plan for me. And yet I still remember my dad still loved me. My dad was still there for me. He was faithful. And I'll never forget, I was 19 or 20 and I was working with my dad, and we were working in Spartanburg. He had got me an internship. And so I was working, I don't even remember the name of the company, but we're there, and I would ride in to work with him every morning. Now, normally, I'm 19 or 20 years old. We're like leaving the house at 7:15. I'm like, all right, Dad, wake me up when we get there. I'm going to catch a few extra minutes of sleep. And I was not making godly decisions with my life, and my sister had ratted me out, wonderful sister. I'm still a little bitter about that. The worst. Yeah. I won't name the sister because I have two of them in case they watch this. And anyways, you know who you are. And my dad looked at me and he said, son, I need to ask you a question. And he said, did you do? And you can fill in the blank. There's just all of these. Am I going to tell him the truth right now? Am I going to try to get my way out of this? And I was just like, at that point in my life, I was just honest. And I said, yeah, I did. And I'll never forget, his tone did not change. Nothing about and he just said, son, if you're going to make those decisions, you're not going to make them under our household roof. So if you're going to live that way, you need to understand what it's going to cost you. And in that moment, I would love to tell you that I heard the lesson loud and clear. I was so frustrated with my sister that she ratted me out, It's like, how dare her? But now looking back, I just saw my dad so steady and trusting that at some point I'm going to realize what I'm missing out on as I'm running from God. And it was a matter of probably 12 months later or so that my life got back to where Jesus wanted it to be. And now I look back and I cherish those moments. As awkward as that conversation was.
The awkward car conversation?
The awkward conversation. I just knew he was being so faithful to his commitment to God and his commitment to love me through even my mess. But a lot of awkward conversations happen in the car.
They do.
I feel like dads just use, if you've never had an awkward conversation with your dad in the car, you're missing out. But
My dad would just be like, "Get in the truck, son. We got to roll." I'm like, "Where are we going?" "You'll find out." Okay. This ain't good.
and in South Georgia, you could disappear.
Oh yeah, it's a thing. There's gators down there. People think they're in South Georgia too. You just don't.
I feel like you got a good awkward dad conversation.
Oh man, I do. Probably too many. Oh, I remember this one particular conversation I had with my dad. He was trying to. It was one of those. It was one of those. How much can I share in church today? It was one of those birds and bees type conversations that you have, which, those are important. You got to have those conversations with your kids. And so my dad, he's trying to have this conversation, and he's trying to be encouraging and informative and all this stuff, and which would have been great, except I was 18 years old, and this was the first time this conversation was happening. So I'm there, and I'm also trying to decide, do I lie? And I'm really, that's how, oh my word, Dad, you are really helping me right now. But I just smiled, and I didn't want to make him feel bad. He was trying his best. So I just, hey man, I appreciate that. And yep, we're good. If we could just never talk about this ever again, that would be a blessing in my life. So anyway, hey, talk to your kids about that stuff. Just don't wait till they're 18 years old to do it. So that's the lesson there.
That's a good one.
Yeah. But, Brian, I think...
You're laughing.
I think you've got a story to share. You got something on your heart, Brian?
Well, I've already said it in the first service, so I can't get out of it now. It is what it is. And it's on the internet, which makes it even better. You gotta love the days before the internet. I was about 14, 15 years old, and I was on a date with my girlfriend at her house. We were watching a movie. And when you're that age, whenever you want to go on a date, you have to have a parent drive you. How awkward is that? They're driving you to your date, they're picking you up from your date. And so I was over her house, we were just watching a movie, and I am now heading home. And I'm sitting in the back seat. Talk about ultimate dad flex there. No, you're not old enough to sit in the front seat. You have to sit in the back seat.
Power move.
I know, it really was. It was just this is really happening right now. And my dad had noticed that I had some red stains on my shirt. And he's like, "Hey, what's on your shirt?" And and in that moment I was like, "Oh, it's just fruit punch, Dad. It spilled." And he was obviously reading me like an open book, and he knew that was not the truth. And so he starts pressing. He goes, "No, I know you're not telling the truth right now. What is that?" And so I had to, in that moment, proceed to explain to my dad about how when we were watching a movie, I tried to have my first kiss with my girlfriend. However, there's a movie reference where they explain going 90 and 10, and I went about 150. And in that moment, I had accidentally headbutted her in the face, and she had a bloody nose. And so there was blood on my shirt from this moment, to which I had to then explain to my father as he's driving me about the most humiliating moment in my life. And
then what happened?
Well, then he found it to be a wonderful, opportune moment to have the wonderful birds and the bees conversation with myself, too, while we're driving and I'm in the back seat. So,
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for inviting me to share that.
You've all got stories. Come on.
That's right.
When we were prepping and talking about the stories, and we're like, "Hey, let's walk through this," and Brian's like, "I'm not sure which story to tell," and he leaks that one, and we're like, "Oh, if you try to not tell that story, we're putting you on the spot. We have to hear this." Everyone. So somebody told me after first service, they said, I will always look at Pastor Brian and think about a bloody nose.
I got no words. It's my story, you know.
Thank you. Well, here's what I know. We could sit up here and we could share a bunch of funny stories, and most of us have had, whether it's our biological father or somebody who's stepped in, whether it's a mom or a coach or somebody who's been in our life, and we have these fathering stories, mothering stories. But I think when we think about the term father and Father's Day, it can make some of us uncomfortable depending on our experience, depending on our background, because we immediately connect it to a noun, to a face, to a person. And so that's going to determine how we relate. But I think for today, as we were kind of talking through what we would share today, it just came that fathering is more than just being the noun and the person, but it's also an action, it's a verb. And so we went to Webster's dictionary, and I love that you know the definition of a word actually can bring some light and some truth. And Webster describes it as this: is in the verb sense, it means to invent, to create, or produce. And so when we look at society, there are gaps all around us. But if I really looked and said, what is a major gap? And we've all had background in student ministry, and we've been working with teenagers of where, you know, you're watching students grow into maturity of adulthood. And we see a lot of gaps. But those gaps don't just disappear when kids turn 18. They don't just appear when they go to middle school. I mean, there are gaps in society all around us. And the real deal is that we need to see mothering and fathering become an action and a verb. And we've got to see this invention, creation, and producing, but we've got to be producing the right people. We've got to be mothering and fathering in the right way. And when we think about it in the sense of the verb, here's what it does. It removes the gender. So you can mother or you can father. It's the same verb. It's the same action, you know? And it's not tied to biological reproduction, because I think sometimes we justify, it's Father's Day, I'm not a dad, I can tune out. No, this is for all of us, because I believe that there's a call and a plan for all of us to father and to mother. And it's also not limited by age. Because I look and I'm praying that there will be 4th and 5th graders that are, in a sense, fathering my children who are going into 2nd grade and going into K4, because they're being a positive influence, which in turn is helping to produce in my children godly things. And so it's not limited, because I think, we could be a student in the room, or we could be a great grandparent in the room, and you're like, I've been there, done that, and I'm like, I'm on. No, there's still an opportunity for us to father and us to mother. And so I just think about there's this great need for us to be producing people who are experiencing love, they're experiencing compassion, they're being led in the ways of Jesus. And so Paul writes this in 1 Corinthians 4:14 through 16, and he says, I'm not writing this to shame you, but to warn you as my dear children. Even if you had 10,000 guardians in Christ, you do not have many fathers. For in Christ Jesus, I became your father through the gospel. Therefore, I urge you to imitate me. And so if I think about how do we father and mother the way that God intends for us, I think the first thing just comes to mind is that we have to imitate Christ. And so when we use this term father and mother, it doesn't always mean that production is good. We have to choose what we're producing. John Maxwell says this: we teach what we know, but we reproduce who we are. And so if all we have seen in our life are bad examples, and we've probably all said this about one or both of our parents, I will never do that when I grow up. You laugh because you're doing it right now, you know? I will never be that. But whatever that blank is, we're all guilty because it is the example that we've seen. It's what has been invested into our life. And so we have to choose if there's brokenness, and there's brokenness in all of us, we've got to trust Christ to repair us so that we can be the mothers and fathers that God has called us to be. One author said this: imitation involves not only copying external behavior, but also replicating internal motivation. And so we see that Paul says here to imitate me. Well, we also find in Paul's writings that he says, follow me as I follow Christ. Because here's what Paul figured out. Paul wasn't a dad in a physical sense, in a biological sense. Paul didn't have children, but he had spiritual sons and daughters because he discovered that the greatest treasure in his life was Jesus. And his one aim was to follow so closely to who Jesus was and who Jesus had created him to be that others could look at his life and they could see Jesus. Now, you want to talk about some pressure as a mom or a dad? If we begin to ask ourselves the question, do my kids, whether that's physically or spiritually speaking, do my kids see Jesus through my life?
That's great.
Because if we want to be spiritual moms and dads in our own homes, in church, in school, wherever we're at, then we've got to get this right, that we've got to become imitators of Christ. But it's not just saying, okay, well, what did Christ do? Okay, Jesus prayed, so I'm going to pray. No, we've got to begin to ask ourselves the question, why did Jesus pray? Because Jesus loved the Father and he loved the people that he was praying for. And so that leads us to this place. When we look at Paul's life, why did he live the way he did? Because he discovered the greatest treasure that he could ever experience is Jesus. And when he discovered that, it transformed who he was. So you know what that means for you and I? When we actually come to this point where we recognize that Jesus is the greatest treasure, he should be the greatest aim for our life, then everything else should begin to be in alignment, which makes imitating Jesus even a possibility for us. I think about this. My son, Cohen, is 6, and he likes to draw sometimes. And I actually, in between services, this is funny, Jensen, our 4-year-old, they filled out a Father's Day thing, and it's like, how old is Dad? 56, you know.
I mean,
he said, I think one of the questions is, what does Dad say a lot? And he said, my dad burps, you know. And I'm like, Jensen, you're not supposed to tell people that. And then up in the corner, there's a smiley face, and it's a picture of me, you know. But Cohen likes to draw too. And I think about both of my boys. If I ask them to draw a picture of Dad, or somebody asks them to draw a picture of Dad, they're going to make a valid effort. But if you just saw that picture, you would have no idea it's me unless they told you. But I believe when we imitate Christ, and it's not an imitation in the sense of like imitation cheese, that is really like nowhere near.
It's the worst.
It's the worst.
Like the fake Pop-Tarts.
But imitation in the way.
You know what I'm talking about? They don't taste the same.
I believe it. I don't know that I've ever had an imitation Pop-Tart. I may have to give it a try.
I didn't know they existed.
But here's the thing. When we imitate.
You guys are blessed.
You stop. We're just going to just rein it in. When we imitate Christ, it should be in the way that people can look at our life and it looks so close to the real thing that they have no idea. But here's how that happens. We have to grow closer in our relationship. We have to mature in our faith. So the pictures that Cohen and Jensen are drawing at age 6 and age 4, which really look nothing like me, should begin to look somewhat clearer as they grow older, as they walk in deeper relationship with their Father. As they mature, the picture clears up. And in the same way for us, if we're looking to be mothers, it doesn't happen overnight. You're going to experience real quickly. Now, here's what will happen in November. When you become a dad officially, you will experience a love you've never experienced. And a depth that I remember, people would look at me and say, you have no idea, you're not a dad yet. And I'm like, you're crazy. No, it's true. But then also somehow, as you pursue growth in that, you'll become the dad that you desire to be. And in the same way, if we want to become imitators of Christ, we've got to have the desire and begin to do something about it and grow in our relationship. And that's the baseline. If we want to be the moms and dads we're supposed to be, we've got to start to imitate Christ.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. And I think that as we embrace this call to action to imitate Christ, then our lives should reflect that. And I think for us, there should be evidence of that internal change, that transformation that takes place within us, and that should be evident outwardly for other people to perceive. And I think Jesus, he hit this directly. He's with his disciples, and we can find this in John 15. And he gives his disciples this parable, this illustration of vines and branches and pruning and growing. And he comes to this conclusion at the end of John 15 where he tells his disciples, listen, you are only my true disciples if you produce much fruit, if you produce good fruit. And so as we kind of embark on this journey to imitate Christ, as we have this internal change, this transformation within us, then our lives outwardly should be evident of it, and that should be seen by how we produce fruit, that we should produce good fruit. And I don't know, if I was sitting there with Jesus, I might have been like, okay, Jesus, what fruit do I need to produce? And what does that mean? And thankfully for you and I here today, we have this beautiful, we have the complete scriptures provided for us. And so the Apostle Paul in Galatians 5, he gives us what this fruit should be. He says the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5. It's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. He gives us these fruit. And so for you and I, when we have taken on and we've made this decision to follow Jesus, to be imitators of Christ to those around us, that we are saying, this is what needs to be seen in my life, the fruit of the Spirit. Because see, when people see us, are they seeing me or are they seeing Christ within me? And I think that takes place when we embody and we live out the fruit of the Spirit. And if we continue in Galatians 6, Paul gives us just this beautiful illustration about reaping and sowing. And so a lot of us, we might be asking, well, how do I produce good fruit? How does that look like in my life? And I think Paul tells us, he says, listen, you reap what you sow. So the question is, if you want to produce and reap good fruit, what are you sowing in your life? You know, because I used this illustration in the first service, and I got corrected as far as the proper horticulture. Is that planting? Yeah, horticulture. Big words there. But we're just going to use the same illustration, and you can. I'm assuming that most of us are like of the same thought because I had no idea. But if I wanted to grow oranges, you would assume that I would be planting orange seeds. But if I was planting apple seeds, or the correct term would be grafting apple saplings in the ground.
Just go with the seeds.
Yeah, we'll
That's
go with
fine.
the seeds, yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. We get it. But if I'm planting apple seeds with the expectation that I'm going to reap oranges, I mean, you're going to look at me and think I'm crazy. I mean, you kind of, yeah.
I'd call the police.
Yeah, exactly. And you'd be right to do so. Because who is going to expect to produce oranges if they are sowing apples? And in the same way in our lives, if we're called to produce good fruit, but we're not sowing good fruit, why should we expect to see that evident in our lives? You know, I think a lot of times we say, "Oh, I want to reap love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, goodness, and self-control." But what are you sowing? Because a lot of times I look and I'm not sowing those things. I'm sowing discord. I'm sowing slander. I'm sowing division. I'm sowing gossip. I mean, those are some hard-hitting ones right there. And if those are the things that I'm sowing, then why would I ever expect to reap those things? So if we want to produce good fruit in our lives, which is what we should be doing, because as the Spirit is within us, we should embody the fruit of the Spirit, then we need to begin by sowing things of love and joy and peace and patience and gentleness and faithfulness and kindness and goodness and self-control. I get those mixed up, but I got them all in there. You know what's interesting, though, is that when Paul writes and he gives us the fruit of the Spirit, he says the fruit of the Spirit is. And maybe that for the longest time that went over my head. But what he does not say is the fruits of the Spirit are. But what he is saying is the fruit of the Spirit is. And what that tells me when I read that is that it is not a pick and choose mentality. That the fruit of the Spirit is not a buffet line where I get to choose, oh, I want some love because who doesn't want love? And I want some joy because everyone wants joy. But I really don't want that patience. No, because I don't want to wait. You know, when I'm in the supermarket, I don't want to wait. I want to go and find the express checkout line. And who wants patience, right? But we have this approach far too often where we look at the fruit of the Spirit as a smorgasbord, and you take what you want and you leave what you don't want. But what Paul says when he says the fruit of the Spirit is that it's all encompassing. It's all or nothing. We don't get to pick and choose. And I think that's so important for you and I, is that we recognize that we need to be exemplifying all of the fruit of the Spirit. And we can't just be satisfied with some and not all, but we should be striving to exemplify it all, you know? And just, you know, as we were sharing today, just some of the more influential moments that our fathers have exemplified in our lives, I couldn't help but notice that we didn't talk about as far as impactful moments. We didn't focus in on the funny moments or even some of the more emotional. But every moment was as far as impactful was when our fathers exemplified and embodied the fruit of the Spirit, whether it was faithfulness and gentleness and kindness and peace. And as Christ followers, I believe that is what is going to leave a lasting impact to those around us. Yes, we're all going to have funny moments, and we're going to remember those, and there are going to be moments that we can, you know, joke around with later, and there's going to be some, you know, emotional moments. But I think the things that are going to leave a lasting impact, and I'll say this, an eternal impact, is when we exemplify and demonstrate the fruit of the Spirit, because the Spirit of God is within us as we are imitating Christ, and we're saying, don't look at me, but look at Jesus within me.
That's great. Man, a lot of good stuff you guys are sharing. You know, I think Father's Day, as Pastor Josh mentioned earlier, a lot of times if you're not a father or maybe you don't have a great relationship with your father, you can immediately go, hey, this isn't for me. And I hope we've done a good job today of really sharing that fathering is so much more than just biology. I mean, I look at my stepdad, and I have zero blood relation to him, but he's just as much as my father is my biological dad. And, you know, as I reflect on my life, and I love what Brian said there, where he says the most impactful moments in our lives have been when the people in our life have really exemplified Christ. And if I could bring a big scale on stage, and if I could put all the lessons that I learned from my dad's on one side, and all the lessons that I learned from the other influential people in my life that God has sent me along the way, I believe that they would actually be equal. I grew up kind of in church, I guess. Early on, sometimes my family went, sometimes we didn't. And as time went on, we went a little bit more often. And I learned a lot from my dad, mainly how to hold a flashlight, you know, like stop moving the flashlight, you know. But as a kid, you're like, oh my gosh, you know. Maybe it's just me. It's just me. I learned a lot from my dad and my stepdad. But let me tell you, I learned just as much from other people in my life as I did from them. And I could go down the list. I had an incredible Sunday school teacher named David who brought really great snacks to Sunday school. I just wanted to have that on record. But more importantly than that, he taught us about the love of Jesus, and he was faithful. He was my Sunday school teacher for years. I had a small group leader when I was in youth named Wayne, who made me jump in a pool one time, which that's a longer story. But every single week he was faithful, and he taught me how to treat other people. I had a boss. I worked at a summer camp, and a boss named George, and I thought he was just teaching me how to work on a lawnmower. But looking back, George was teaching me how to love other people the way that Christ loves us. You know, it was always like, you know, you got to clean out the carburetor. And anyway, Jesus loves you just the way that you are. And also hand me a wrench. You know, it was just like, it was in between these moments. Like I thought we were working on something, and we were, but he was at the same time working on me, you know. And again, I could tell story after story of the people who have impacted my life. that God sent my way that were not my mother or my father. And why am I telling you this? The three of us together, we've spent a lot of time in ministry, particularly student ministry. And I can tell you that there's a lot of students and a lot of people out there, because students grow up and become adults, and there's a lot of folks out there that don't have anybody that mother or father them. And there's some research that came out of Harvard University a few years ago that said the single most important factor that will determine whether a student is successful or not. Now, this is from Harvard. I'm not talking about like spiritually successful. I'm talking about all the stuff you would normally think of. They graduate high school, they get a job, they stay off drugs, all that type of stuff. But it says the single most important factor for whether or not they found success was whether or not they had a single adult, at least one adult that cared about them. It didn't say parent, it said adult. And in my years of experience, I've met so many people that do not have that until they came to church. And I had some parents that supported me, but really my life was changed forever by the local church. If it weren't for the men and women in the church, I don't think I know I would not be a pastor. I'm not even sure that I would be a Christian. And as I look around the room today, I don't even know most of you, but a room this size, I know there are people in this church, you have been faithful year after year, and you show up and you serve faithfully, and you may feel like nobody ever notices you. Let me tell you something, Jesus notices you. And one day you're going to get to heaven, and there's going to be so many people that thank you for exemplifying Christ, for having the fruit of the Spirit, and for serving them. You're most like Jesus when you're serving other people. And, Scripture teaches that the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God and to love others. How do you do that? You love God by serving God, and you love people by serving people. And really where we wanted to land on today is we didn't want some just like, hey, here's 5 ways to be a better dad, all that type of stuff. Really, we wanted to land today by saying this. If you would just imitate Christ, if you would allow your life to have the fruit of the Spirit, if you would serve other people, you would completely change our world. You would change our church. You would change our city. There's probably a young person in this church who knows that, you grew up at this church and now you're the pastor. How incredible is that? Our next pastor of our church might be in kids right now, and they may need somebody in there praying for them and loving on them and showing them the right way when they go astray every once in a while. But each and every one of us, you can do something. And I'm not just talking about pouring into the person that's younger than you. I need people that are my age. There might be somebody in here that's a dad that's younger than me. I need all your tips and tricks, It's not always about pouring into someone who's younger than you. It's about pouring into people in general. Your coworker, maybe your dad today needs to be encouraged. But if you imitate Christ, you grow in the fruit of the Spirit, you serve other people, and then ultimately you teach other people to do the same thing, you'll change our world forever. And years and years ago, all those people God sent my way, they certainly changed my world. And now I get to be a pastor, and I get to love on students each and every week, and I'm so thankful for that. And I'm so thankful for the men and women that God put in my life that encouraged me and prayed for me and taught me the ways of the Lord when I didn't know it myself.
That's good. But here's what we know. We gather on Sundays so people can come to know God. We can't imitate Christ. We can't exemplify fruits of the Spirit. We can't really serve and lead others the way we should without Jesus being the treasure of our life. Without us opening our eyes to recognize the sacrifice that He paid so that we don't have to be separated, so that we can walk on this journey of where He has us, from where we are to where He wants us to be. That's it. Otherwise, why gather on Sundays? If we don't create a space for people to know God, I don't want any part of it, because I know what that relationship means to me. And so here's how we're going to close today. You've heard the message. You've heard the challenge. I feel like there's a lot even for us to chew on. I mean, I want to walk away from today saying, man, am I fathering the way that I should? And it's more than just in my house. It's everywhere I go. It's every relationship I have. Am I fathering the way that God intends for me to? But the most important question that we could ask ourselves today is, am I right with Jesus? Because all of this is just external if we don't get the internal right. And so for us today, I'm gonna ask every head to be bowed, every eye to be closed as we close. And I'm just asking a simple question. We've already seen people today who have made a decision to rededicate their life, to begin this journey of faith, to say, I'm saying yes to Jesus. So heaven is already excited and celebrating. But I just believe we don't gather except for this moment to create space for people to know God. And you may have showed up on Father's Day. You may have gotten drugged to church. You may have just stumbled into the building. Whatever your story is on your journey, God has brought you here for this moment, whether you're online or you're in the building. And you know, because you feel it. You know, all of these things sound great, but it's not possible until I make a decision to follow Jesus. But today, we're going to give you that chance. And if you're in the room today and you just say, Pastor, I need to pray that prayer. I need to make a decision. Today's my day. I just need to take a step because we're all on this journey. Everybody's journey looks different, but the most important step is that first step to say yes to Jesus. And if you're here today and you just say, hey, Pastor, I need to pray that prayer, will you just slip your hand up? Nobody's looking in the room. I see that hand. Thank you. Anybody else in the balcony, in the floor? Just say, hey, I'm making that decision today. Yes, I see that hand. Thank you. Anybody else? What a day, Father's Day, to come home to say I'm getting right with my Heavenly Father. Can we repeat this prayer today? Dear Jesus, come into my life. Forgive me of my sin, of my mistakes. Help me to follow you. Help me to trust you. Help me to love you. Help me to love others. In Jesus' name, amen. Church, can we celebrate this morning people making a decision to follow Jesus? And I just want to tell you, if you raised your hand, if you made that decision today, we've been praying and we've been expecting every single day. We're praying and believing for God to do some transformation in the lives of people because we know we'd be nothing without God. And so we have some next steps. This isn't just to pray a prayer and you're done. It's taking steps on this journey of faith. And so we want to walk with you. There's a number on the screen behind me. You can text that number and we'll connect you. Or you can stop by our Connection Center in the lobby today. And we've got a free resource. It's called Following Jesus. And it's got a guide in there that just tells you, here's some next steps. They're small steps, okay? We're not trying to hey, we're going to throw you into the deep end of the pool now. No, that's not the way God intends for it. And we're here to journey with you from where you are to where He wants you to be.